We recently added a spear gun to our VR game on Steam, and quite a few people were asking us how we did it, so we decided to make a rough tutorial video about it. B.o.W VR has been developed using Unreal Engine 5. Other assets we are using include Mordentral's VR expansion plugin, developer Galadar's Oceanology, Jake Playable Dev's full-body VR IK avatar, as well as Triggerfish Game's very own interactive VR menu system also. And you can find links to all of these additional assets as well as any other notable sources mentioned in the description box down below. The spear gun is made available to the player once they have completed the Ultra version of the game. It is not required to complete the game, but does add to the overall experience of the game by allowing the player to experience a bit more of what it would be like to take part in some actual spear fishing. With the spear gun, the player can interact with all of the game's fish, whether they are particle fish, physics fish, or spline fish. There are a couple of other items that are available to the player earlier on in the game that work in a similar way to this. These are the spear pole and diving knife. However, the spear pole will only work on the small particle fish, while the diving knife will work on some of the slightly larger spline and physics fish also. After shooting, the spear of the spear gun will be attached to the gun itself by the line. This can then be grabbed by the player to hoist the spear back towards the player. The spear gun can also be attached to the player's belt, which makes pulling the line back easier. The broadcast kill zone blueprint is placed directly into the map. Its main role is to notify all of the particle fish whenever a relevant weapon is in a deadly state. And it does this by broadcasting that deadly location to each of the Niagara systems found in the map. This setup is based off of the excellent Niagara export particle data to blueprint tutorial video by GameDev Outpost, a link to which you can also find below. On event begin, play the broadcast killzone blueprint uses a for each loop to set the callback references for each of the relevant actors found in the map. It then also adds them to an array. You can see that we have 4 different types of actors here, so 4 different types of loops and arrays are required. Whenever a weapon is moved at a deadly speed, it uses a reference to the broadcast killzone blueprint to call its set killzone function. This function then stores the location of the kill zone as well as a reference to the weapon that has called the function. It also sets a boolean that allows the blueprint to know if the weapon is in a deadly state or not. After this, it then loops through the array and uses the set weapon kill zone event found in the array's blueprints to set the location and radius of the kill zone found in each particle system. Here we are placing a static mesh in the location also for testing purposes only. As you can see in this example, if the weapon was being held, then the location would not be set, and this is because the spear will only work against the game's stingers when it is being fired, not held. The set callback ref and set weapon kill zone lock events found in each of the array's blueprints are shown for you here. Whenever a particle is killed, the broadcast killzone blueprint will be notified via the receive particle data event. And if any of the weapons are in a deadly state, then the weapon's relevant sort data function will be called. Here we have prioritized the weapons with the spear being the most important and the spear pole being the last. The sort spear data function takes the particle data received and sets the size, X rotation, and Niagara system reference variables also. It then compares the location received to the actual weapon's location to make sure that they are within a reasonable distance from each other. It then sets the weapon's deadly state to off. After this, it checks which Niagara system type the data was received from and calls the weapon's set fish mesh event, providing it with the data received, as well as the correct corresponding static mesh that the system uses also. The set fish mesh event for each weapon then takes that data and sets the SM fish component's static mesh type, rotation, and scale. As well as this, it spawns a speared fish blueprint using the transform of the SM fish component, and creates a reference to that spawned blueprint also. Depending on whether or not the scale mesh reference is valid or not, it will then either call the set scale fish var or set static fish var events. These events then provide the speared fish blueprint with the data that it needs for each mesh type, as well as a reference to the SM fish component, whose location it requires also. The speared fish blueprint is spawned whenever a mesh-based fish, or particle fish, is destroyed. After spawning, it will constantly change its location to match that of the weapon itself, be it the spear, spear pole, or diving knife. The Show Scalefish event sets the correct skeletal mesh in the Scalefish component. It also sets any frame offset vector that may be required later. It then calls Fix Scalefish. The Show Static Fish event sets the correct static mesh in the Static Fish component. It then sets the constraint between the root component and the Static Fish component. It also sets Simulate Physics on and Hidden in Game off for the Static Fish component. The Fix Scalefish event sets the constraint between the root component and the Scalefish component. It also sets the frame offset and Simulate Physics on and Hidden in Game off for the Scalefish component, as well as calling the Change Colors event. It is important to note that the root component has its Simulate Physics set to off, its collision-enabled set to physics only, and all of its collision channels set to ignore, while the constraint itself has only a small amount of rotation allowed. Event Tick is disabled at startup for this blueprint, and is only enabled once the SM Fish ref has been set. For as long as the SM Fish ref remains valid, then Event Tick will move the location of the root component to match that of the SM Fish component. It also sets the scale of both the Static Fish component as well as the Scalefish component to match that of the SM Fish component. Once the ref for SM Fish becomes invalid, then this actor will be destroyed. The Change Colors event sets the tint parameter for each of the materials in the Material Instance Dynamic Array, while the Fade Fish event sets the fade parameters for each of the materials in the same array. The default materials to dynamic macro gets all of the materials from the Scalefish and creates the Material Instance Dynamic Array that is used by both the Change Colors event and the Fade Fish event also. Here, the Speargun is a child of the Held Object Blueprint class. What this means is that it inherits a bunch of stuff from its parent class. It is also an inventory object, which means that it cannot be dropped, only equipped or unequipped, or attached to the player's belt. Whenever this item is held by the player, all of its physics collisions are turned off, and it is directly attached to a slot on the character mesh. At the same time, a physics object is also activated of the same static mesh type. This is set to Hidden in Game and is attached to the character mesh by a constraint. This physics object then provides the in-game collision for the held object. This is true of any held object, and we have found that this approach provides the best results. On event begin play, the Speargun determines whether it has been unlocked or not. If it is unlocked, then it will set its capsule collision to grabbable. It also checks its start state event and then removes itself from the map if it is a pickup item and already in the player's inventory. It also binds the Remove Speargun event to the Destroy Any Held Items event dispatcher. When Tick is enabled, the Speargun checks if it is held and loaded. If it is, and the corresponding trigger button is pulled, it will then set its ready-to-fire flag. If the trigger is then released within a 1-second time frame, the weapon will fire. It uses this method as the trigger buttons are also in use for other hold and release events that require longer time frames. The Fire Weapon event first checks if the player has died or if the VR menu system is currently disabled before proceeding. It then sets its state to Unloaded, changes its static mesh to 1 without the spear attached, and then resets its physics object collision also. After this, it calls the Spawn Spear event. The Spawn Spear event disables the spear tip overlap collision and sets the spear's rope connector to Hidden in Game. It also moves the spear gun slide to its unloaded location before spawning a spear blueprint using the spear gun position ref's transform. It then sets the check distance bool, and 1 second later, the distance timeout bool also. The reload calls on component begin overlap is used to reload the spear onto the spear gun. It first checks that the spear is held and that no fish is currently attached to it before dropping the relevant hand's grip and then reloading the weapon. As well as the reload weapon event, there is also a quick reload event with no sound effect. Here the rope connector is unhidden and the current spear is destroyed. The static mesh is changed back to the one with the spear attached. The spear tip overlaps collision is re-enabled and the slide is set back into the loaded position. If the gun is held, then the relevant hand's physics object collision is set up. The spear attached bool is then set to false and the loaded bool is set to true also. Once the spear has been spawned, it creates a reference to itself by calling the set player spear ref event in the character blueprint. We decided that the character blueprint was the best place to store this reference, along with the several other references that are shown here, as this particular weapon requires multiple individual blueprints, all having to share several different references amongst themselves. Back in the Speargun blueprint, event tick also calls the fix constraints event, which waits for the player blueprint's spear ref to become valid before checking the distance that the spear has traveled. Once it has traveled past a certain amount, or the distance timeout bool has been set, it then sets the spear attached bool and clears the check distance bool. It then resets the spear gun lines due once, before spawning the spear gun line blueprint itself. It will then set the player blueprint's spear gun position ref, and calls the spear gun's line set constraint event. If the player spear ref becomes invalid, this will then break both the left hand and right hand main spear constraints. These constraints are originally set by the spear constraints event, depending on which hand actually holds the spear gun, and only once the spear is actually attached to the line itself. The spear tip overlaps on component begin overlap is used to allow the player to poke the fish with the tip of the spear when the spear gun is loaded. The check start state event is called on event begin play. It checks to see if a spear is in the world, and if it is, then it will set the player's spear gun position ref. If not, then it will either reload or quick reload the weapon, depending on whether the line was broken and the previous spear lost or not. The Speargun spear blueprint is currently only spawned by the Speargun. It is also a child of the held object blueprint, but it is not an inventory object, so it can be dropped, and it cannot be attached to the player's belt either. On event begin play, the spear first creates a reference to the kill zone broadcast blueprint found in the map. Assuming that the spear is not a pickup, it then sets the poke fish, broadcast kill zone, and set physics SFX volume event timers before attaching the static mesh component to the spear base ref component. It then sets a physics constraint for the base ref and sets simulate physics to on for the static mesh also. It then plays a launch sound effect and sets the spear to deadly before executing a short timeline of 0.2 seconds. During this timeline, an impulse is added to the static mesh at the force location. When the timeline has finished, buoyancy is enabled. The spear is set to undeadly after 1 second, and after 2 more seconds the grabbable channel is set to block. On event tick, the spear blueprint calls the stay attached event. It also checks if the spear is held in either hand, and if it is not, it then calls the attach rope to spear base event dispatcher. If it is held in the left hand, it calls the attach rope to spear base LH event dispatcher, and if it is held in the right hand, it then calls the attach rope to spear base RH event dispatcher. Also, if the spear is held in either hand and the spear has a fish on it, then the corresponding polecatch variable is set for either hand. This lets the storage bag know that it needs to become visible so that the player may deposit their catch into it. The poke fish event calls the is blood visible event as well as the stab mesh fish event. It then checks if the spear has a fish on it, and if it does not, it then also calls the stab particle fish event. The stab particle fish event checks if the spear is held and if it has moved further away from the player. If it has, then it checks the velocity of the hand holding the spear, and if it is over a certain velocity, it will then set the spear is deadly flag. The spear tip overlap components on component begin overlap checks which object the spear tip has overlapped. If it is a valid object, it will then set the reference to it before setting the overlapped flag. Also, here note that the overlap will fail if the spear has a fish on it, or the component has been tagged with ignore stab. One exception to this is the inflatable beach toy, which if can pop is set to true, then it will call the pop event instead. The stab mesh fish event checks if the spear tip is overlapped. It then checks if the spear is being held, as well as resetting a do once. If the spear is not held, it then checks if the spear is deadly. If the spear is deadly, it will then call the impaled results event. If the spear is held, it will check the hand's velocity. If the velocity is below a certain threshold, it will call the poked results event. If it is over a certain threshold, it will then call the stabbed results event instead. If the spear tip is not overlapped, if valid, it will then let some of the references know that they are no longer being stabbed before resetting the other three do once. The poked results event lets any valid references know that they are being poked, while the stabbed results event lets any valid references know that they are being stabbed. If applicable, then it will also destroy the fish and place the fish on the actual spear via the set fish mesh event. Also, if the fish is one of the larger physics fish, then it will call the physics fish results event. The impaled results event lets any valid references know that they have been impaled. It also calls the attached spear event. The physics fish results event sets the physics fish hit by spear flag. If the physics fish spear destroys flag is set to true, it will destroy the physics fish. If the place on spear flag is set to true, then it will also place the fish onto the spear via the set fish mesh event. If set to false, then it will call the attached spear event instead. The attached spear event calls the release grips event. It then sets the static mesh collision to off and checks if scale mesh ref is valid. If it is, then it turns simulated physics off before attaching the static mesh to the scalefish component using the closest bone as the socket name. If it is not, then it will attach the static mesh component to the static mesh instead. After this, it then sets the big fish attached flag. It calls the set constraint event using the player's spear rope ref, as well as the player's set big fish ref. After this, it checks the spear kills flag. If true, then it calls the physics fish hurt blood and dead events, before detaching the spear a short while later. If false, then it calls the physics fish impaled results event, before detaching the spear some time later. The stay attached event calls both the fix rotations and set player spear refs events. It checks if the player's spear gun equipped flag is set to true, and if not, then it will destroy the spear. It also checks if either the big fish attached or lost spear flags are set to true. If they are, then it will set the grabbable channel to ignore and reset the do once. If set to false, then it will detach the static mesh component. It sets the grabbable channel back to block, as well as re-enables simulate physics also. It also re-enables collision for the static mesh component, as well as sets the constraint for the player's spear rope ref, and clears the player's big fish ref also. The lost spear event sets the lost spear flag to true, and detaches the static mesh component. It then re-enables simulate physics, as well as collisions also. It then calls the fade-out event. The fade-out event fades the spear out in much the same way as the previous fade-out events. The is blood visible function sets the visibility for the fish blood particles depending on whether the particle system is underneath the surface of the water or not. The clear all refs function clears all of the target actor refs. The broadcast killzone function checks the is spear deadly flag. If true, it then calls the killzone broadcast refs set spear killzone event. If false, it then lets the killzone broadcast ref know that the spear is no longer deadly. The set player spear refs function calls the player's set player spear ref, as well as the set player spear base position ref events, and provides the necessary references to them. The fix rotations function checks the get static fish rotations, and get scalefish rotations flags. If either of these are true, it then acquires the necessary rotations and uses them to force the SM fish rotation to match. The release grips function checks if the spear is in either the left or right hand, and then drops the grip of that hand. The line blueprint works in a similar way to the speared fish blueprint, in that the spear ref mesh end of the line will move to match the position of the spear gun itself, while the other end is physically attached to the spear by a constraint. There are also 23 individual lengths of line in the blueprint, with each length being attached by another constraint. On event begin play, the line blueprint sets up a reference to the player and calls the player's speargun rope ref event, providing a reference to itself. It calls the set type and setup dispatchers events also. The setup dispatchers event binds the attach rope to spear base, attach rope to spear base LH, and attach rope to spear base RH events. These events all call the set constraint event, while providing individual frame offset vectors also. The set type function makes an array out of all of the line meshes. It then loops through the array, setting the correct material and the world static collision channel to block. It also sets the linear and angular damping for each static mesh, and upon completion, it calls the set material instance event. The set material instance function loops through the line array and creates a dynamic material instance array for each material. Event tick calls the check ref event. It also checks to see if the line is overstretched. If the line remains overstretched for more than 0.2 seconds, then the break chord event is called. The check refs event checks to see if the player's spear ref is valid. It also checks if the spear is lost. If the spear is lost, then the overstretched flag is set to false, and the hide rope event is called. If the spear ref is not valid and the spear is not lost, then the line is destroyed. If the spear ref is valid and the spear not lost, then the player's spear gun position ref validity is checked. If it is not valid and the VR menu is on, then the overstretched flag is also set to false, and the hide rope event is called. If it is valid, then the check status event is called, and the start ref mesh is set to the player's spear gun position refs transform. The show rope event is also called. The check status event calls the big fish attached event. It also checks the distance that the first physics constraint is from the top position marker. If it is over the start break distance value, then the overstretched flag is set. If it is below the start break distance value, then the spear break distance is also checked. This is based on the distance between the gun and the spear itself. The set constraint event sets physics constraint 23 between the player's spear base position ref and also the line 23 static mesh. It also checks to see if there is a big fish attached to the spear before applying the frame offset. The break chord event breaks physics constraint 22 while playing a short sound effect. It also calls the player's spear refs release grips and lost spear events. The cut chord event breaks the physics constraint while playing the same sound effect and calls the player's spear refs release grips and lost spear events. The big fish attached event checks to see if the player's big fish ref is valid. If it is valid, then it will use the player's own VR movement controller to rotate and move the player as you would expect. This effect is also altered depending on whether the player is immersed in water or not. The show rope and hide rope events either show or hide the line. The hide rope event will also destroy the line blueprint on completion, but only if the player's lost spear flag is set. Whenever an object is held that isn't a child of the held object blueprint in B.o.W II VR, a grip point actor is spawned and attached to the object that the player has held. There are several different types of grip point actors, but here we are using the line grip point actor, which is a child of the grip point parent blueprint. Here you can see the events of the parent blueprint. The line grip has a fist grip type, isn't a handle, and has a fixed rotate. These blueprints report the grip point's position and rotation to the player's character, and this data is then used by B.o.W IK's full-body VR IK avatar system to let the avatar know where it needs to place its hands. The event tick for the line grip blueprint waits for the hit component ref to become valid before applying a force to the hit component. The force amount and direction depends on where the player's controllers are. The hit component's ref is set after the grip point actor is spawned and attached to that actor. We found this to be the best way of allowing the player to physically grab and pull on the line itself. The spear gun can be attached to either side of the belt. When the player attaches the spear gun to the belt, the actual spear gun is destroyed, and another version of the spear gun becomes visible on the belt. If the spear gun has been fired, then the spear and line will remain in the world, with the spear gun end of the line moving to its new location on the belt. The spear can also be reloaded while the spear gun is attached to the belt. The Show RS Spear Gun and LS Spear Gun events show or hide the spear gun on the belt. They also call the player's set player spear gun position ref event, using the displayed spear gun mesh for reference, as well as set the spear's new main physics constraint. The belt's reload collision overlap will only work if the belt's spear gun is showing, and there is no fish attached to the spear. The spear has to be held in one of the player's hands also. If it is held, then either the player's drop all grips left or right events will be called, followed by a reload sound effect, and the spear being destroyed. We hope this guide was of some use to you. Cheers!